Some say our old animation is so bad, it makes cave paintings look like HD. But we think our older stories have a certain stylish quality that has to be seen. So here are 8 more stories from the Axis side. It's the 3rd of June, 1942, in the deserts of Libya. 9 P-40B Tomahawk fighters from the South African Air Force 5th Squadron are rushing to the aid of French defenders that are being bombed in a fort. It's a star-studded flight with 3 flying aces in its midst: Cecil Golding, Robin Pear, and Louis Botha. As they approach the fort, they see the Stukas diving. The chilling screams of the infamous sirens, known as Jericho horns, take over the desert. Flashes of destruction devastate the fighting French below. The South African pilot's eyes burn with fury, and the flight charges in for revenge. They strike at once, most focus on the Bf-109s, but Cecil Golding aims to take down a low-flying Stuka. He sweeps in from above, guns blazing. He's behind now, and the Stuka is nothing but a target. The pilot swerves and evades as 50 caliber bullets zip past him. But it's an exercise in futility. The much more maneuverable Tomahawk tears the German bomber to pieces until it can hardly maneuver anymore. The Stuka falls towards the ground until it slams violently into the earth in a shower of dust and sand. Across the sky, the battle turns into a fight for survival for the German pilots. The rear gunner of the lead Stuka can do nothing but watch in horror as the swarm of Allied aircraft scatter for targets. He knows they're next. He warns the pilot. The pilot requests immediate backup over the radio. A few kilometers away, Fane Ace, Hans Joachim Marseille, and his wingman are on a patrol aboard their Bf-109s when they receive the desperate plea. They don't need to be told twice. They slam the throttle to full and race to the rescue. They arrive to a chaotic scene with Allied fighters all over the Stukas, but Marseille is undeterred. Below him, he spots the closest Stuka. Its tail gunner is trading fire with a chasing Tomahawk.
Stay close and cover my rear.
They dive into the attack, sweeping from above on the unsuspecting Tomahawk. Marseille is still a way back, but he feels he can land the shot. He pushes the button, and a burst of 20mm fires across the sky. His precision is immaculate, and a shell slams straight into the enemy aircraft. The Stuka crew cheer as their pursuer breaks off, spewing a trail of oil in its wake. The wounded Tomahawk loses power and glides inexorably towards the sand. Golding watches in horror as he sees his friend go down in a cloud of dust and sand as it hits the earth. In a fury, he turns to meet Marseille. The 2 aviators are on a collision course. Both are fearless and daring, staring down each other's barrels. They open fire, holding the trigger down as they see the enemy's tracers streaming from both planes. 50 cals zip by Marseille, every one missing its target. Golding has no such luck. His Tomahawk is struck, square in the nose. Shrapnel enters the cockpit, severing the control stick and striking Golding on his left leg. The German emerging victorious. Golding has lost pitch and roll control, but he's too low to bail. Despite the pain, he works through the situation. He can still use the rudder to steer left and right using his healthy leg, but it causes a roll. Fortunately, the Tomahawk can extend flaps independently, so he uses them to carefully counteract the roll. Very gently, he limps the aircraft lower and lower, cutting back on the throttle to slow for the eventual landing. His heart accelerates the closer the ground gets. The slower he goes, the more he needs to deploy the flaps just to keep the nose up. He skims the ground as low as he dare. The aircraft bleeds off speed as he deploys more and more flaps to keep it in the air, shedding as much speed as he can before the inevitable impact. Cecil Golding comes round, dazed and confused, but somehow alive. He pulls back the canopy and is surprised to see none other than his friend who was just shot down, running to his aid.
They've got my leg.
Come on, let's get you out.
I'm down. Robin, Louis, make sure you get the blood.
Robin Pear hears the message and doesn't wait around as he sees Marseille's BF-109 in the distance. He sets a course to intercept alongside his wingman. Marseille is running low on 20mm ammunition, but he's far from done. As the two Tomahawks approach him, he turns to face the danger head on. Pear opens fire. Then Marseille, but today, luck is with the German. Pear's hand releases the trigger as a 20mm volley pummels through the cockpit of the Tomahawk. It's over. As Pear stops firing, this tells the German ace all he needs to know, and the Tomahawk drifts down, exploding in a ball of fire. Back on the ground, Morrison and Golding are making their way on foot to the fort, when the pair notices a third airframe smoking on the ground. It's the Stuka Golding had shot down just a few minutes prior. They make their way to the wrecked enemy aircraft as fast as they can with Golding's injury, while the smoke grows into a fire. Golding tells Morrison to go on ahead, and the captain sprints the last leg of the distance. Within, he sees a German pilot hunched over the controls, weak but alive.
Yeah, get in, get that. Ha ha.
No chance.
Back in the air, Louis Botha, the last of the 5th Squadron's 3 aces, spots Marseille hounding yet another one of his friends, and he charges in to the rescue. Botha catches the German mid-chase, flying by while ripping through the ME-109 with his 50 caliber machine guns. Marseille immediately breaks off the chase, leaving the extremely battered Tomahawk to escape the scene. Marseille's 109 has a few extra holes, but no heavy damage, so he sets his sights on the new Challenger. The pair lock themselves in combat, twisting and turning in a variety of aerial maneuvers. Marseille catches glimpses of Botha, and Botha does the same, both opening fire and striking the enemy, but both failing to land that critical hit. They grind each other down in a battle of wits and cunning, but as it drags on, Marseille starts to gain the upper hand. Botha just can't keep up. Marseille is flying like a man possessed, somehow managing to find opportunities to fire when no other pilot can. Bit by bit, the German grinds down the Allied Tomahawk. Botha can feel its performance deteriorating. The opportunities are becoming scarcer, and escaping enemy volleys becoming harder. Marseille sweeps in for another attack run and tears through the Tomahawk with 7.92mm, one bullet punching straight through a coolant line. A white trail shoots out the back of the Tomahawk, and Botha decides it's time to run to fight another day. Marseille spots the fleeing Botha and wants to give chase, but in the distance, 3 more P-40Bs are flying his way. He glances at his ammunition counter, and the needle is right at the bottom. He has no choice. He has to turn for home. Botha tries to nurse his plane home, but the temperature gauge is rapidly increasing. It's not good. He has to ditch. He knows if his plane goes down that the German will have defeated 3 aces today.
Damn German! Oh, hell.
But finally, he has no choice and puts down his bird in the desert. All 3 aces were defeated, and only 2 escaped with their lives. Marseille, on the other hand, returns to land with 6 more victories to his name, bringing his tally to 75.
Leave some for me next time.
9.
It's 23rd of April 1941. 20 Bf-109s escort a group of Stukas high over the sands of North Africa. One of the pilots is young and at the start of a glorious career.
Yeah, it's me again.
Hans Joachim Marseille. He spots a flight of enemy Hawker Hurricanes below them, and in his characteristic attitude, he plunges into the attack without a second thought, leaving his squadron surprised and confused as their star pilot dives away without explanation. Marseille speeds straight into danger, all on his own, showing no regard for his own safety. Teetering on the edge of his 109's maximum speed, he lines up a shot on the rapidly approaching enemy and pulls the trigger. The barrage of 20mm shells streaks across the sky, but misses his mark. Marseille races past the enemy, making them split. He's a bit annoyed at his uncharacteristically poor marksmanship, but remains unconcerned and then turns around for another run. But these Hurricanes aren't planning on going down easily. 3 Hurricanes catch up to Marseille and open fire upon the German aircraft. The combined 24 7.7mm machine guns send an absolute thunderstorm of lead and tracers his way. Marseille weaves and dives in evasive maneuvers as bullets strike his aircraft, and he slithers out of their crosshairs. Marseille smiles.
You are in trouble now.
Fights are much more fun than ambushes anyway. He keeps twisting and turning at breakneck speed across the sky. The Hurricane pilots struggle to match him. He dodges their shots, outsmarting them at every turn, as he leaves the Hurricanes further and further in the dust. All except one. The 3rd Hurricane remains hot on his heels, shadowing Marseille's every move and peppering his 109 with machine gun fire. Soon Marseille is left in a one-on-one battle with all other enemies left behind. He keeps up the breakneck maneuvers, trying everything to get rid of the Hurricane, but the unknown enemy matches his every move, almost as if he was reading Marseille's mind. In their tangle, a scissor maneuver takes shape. The 2 warbirds crisscross in the sky, simultaneously attempting to aim at their opponent while keeping out of the other's deadly line of fire, roaring past each other mere feet apart. They dance in the sky, a pair in deadly choreography, both waiting for the other to make that fatal mistake. And then Marseille slips. He's heading towards the enemy when he realizes he's too far ahead and is about to cross right in front of the Hurricane's guns. His heart sinks. It's far too late to correct. Time slows to a crawl, and his 109 approaches inexorably into the Hurricane's line of fire. Marseille ducks in his seat and thinks to himself, this could be the end. The Hurricane times his open fire on the passing German. The first shot hit the engine, then the cockpit. Bullets punch through the canopy before bursting out the other side. The shots rip through the rest of the 109's tail before the Hurricane speeds past. Marseille opens his eyes, shocked to even be alive. But he might not remain so for long. He can feel his bird is down on power, and the irritating air thick with the mist of oil and coolant assaults his nose. He looks back over his shoulders and sees the Hurricane turning around for a second run. Could it be that Hans Joachim Marseille, the young hotshot known for repeatedly jumping headfirst into fights against all odds and emerging victorious almost effortlessly, finds himself finally outclassed? With his bird wounded underneath him and a great talent behind the controls of his enemy, Marseille does something he's never done before. He concedes defeat. He flips his machine upside down and pulls into a steep dive, picking up speed to race for the safety of his airfield before his opponent can finish him off. From on board the Hurricane, the pilot watches his prey fall away. He could still pursue and likely claim the kill, but the rest of the squadron is in a brawl with the other German fighters, so he takes the underwhelming victory and rushes to his friend's rescue. His name is James Dennis. The two foes would meet again just 1 month later. Dennis and his wingman are flying low near Tobruk. They're on a strafing mission in the middle of shooting columns of advancing German supplies. Dennis takes a breather from pounding the ground and takes a precautionary look over at his wingman. But he's met with a horrifying sight. There's a Bf-109 diving down from the sky and straight for his comrade, with 5 more 109s following in the tow of the leader. It's Marseille. Lacking a radio, Dennis is powerless as Marseille tears his wingman to shreds, the wreckage spinning and falling towards the earth. The perpetrator races on, accelerating in his direction, but oddly not straight towards him. Sensing Marseille's overconfidence, Dennis holds position, pretending he hasn't seen the 109, to encourage the German pilot to lower his guard. And Marseille does just that, flying on with the intent of passing by the French pilot without a care in the world. Dennis pounces. He turns hard to give chase. The Hurricane reacts violently, protesting under the high Gs as he brings himself straight onto a collision course with the 109, speeding straight towards his side. Marseille spots him at the last moment and rapidly tries to turn the nose and fire, but he's too late. A shower of tracers emerges from the Hurricane and crashes down on the 109, ripping and tearing through the fuselage for as long as he can before he races past his target. Marseille shakes off the shock and immediately turns hard in pursuit. He hunts down the Frenchman, but Dennis constantly evades the 109's deadly gaze, climbing in a turn. The German aircraft follows, locking the pair into yet another dogfight across the heavens. They twist and weave, climbing higher and higher as they chase down each other in a beautiful and dangerous ballet. Neither pilot can get a shot in, with both men reading each other's plays to perfection. It's a battle of youthful passion and energy against cold and calculating experience, with a near equal amount of skill to back them up. Marseille keeps evading the Hurricane's fire, but try as he might, he can't get in position to return fire either. But then, mid-maneuver, the morning sunrise hits him right in the eyes, and he gets an idea. He escapes the dance and flies straight towards the sun in the horizon. Dennis, though, isn't fooled. He can see what his enemy is trying to do, but he doesn't care. He gives chase with the sun in his face, chasing down Marseille almost completely blind. The Hurricane hunts down the 109, inching closer and closer. Dennis can't see anything, but he knows Marseille is right there. Then, suddenly, Marseille's 109 fully hides the sun, lifting the blindfold from Dennis's eyes and presenting him with a gigantic target. Dennis pulls the trigger. The Hurricane's 8 machine guns pour a storm of bullets straight into the 109, the frame reverberating with the clatter of hits. In fractions of a second, the 109's fuselage is ripped apart and a fire breaks out. Marseille dives away from the barrage, but the damage has been done and a long tail of flames sprouts from his airframe as he accelerates earthbound. Dennis doesn't bother pursuing and leaves the 109 to his fate. Marseille holds the dive, unwilling to bail. He cuts the engine and pushes his nose as vertical as he dare, reaching the 109's maximum safe speed and then surpassing it. Marseille is in total focus as his aircraft shakes and shudders all around him, threatening to disintegrate under the strain. But he looks at his wings and sees the licks of flame about to be blown out by the wind. Just a little longer. He holds the dive, fearlessly facing forward as the ground gets closer and closer. But miraculously, the fire flickers out. Marseille pulls up, squished into the seat by the harsh G-forces, but narrowly escaping with his life. He looks back over his shoulder, searching for his mysterious assailant, but finding nothing but clear skies. He's not angry. He can only respect a fellow pilot that beat him fair and square.
That was a damn good fight.
Marseille would limp his aircraft home and get right back into service. He continued living every day like his last, displaying zero discipline on the ground and all the skill in the air. His rebel style would take him farther than the cool, collected Dennis could ever hope for, earning 158 victories and the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds for his name. Dennis would sport an impressive career as well, returning home with 21 victories and the Légion d'honneur around his neck. But despite that, he was still vastly outshined. His confrontations with Marseille are reduced to a footnote in the Germans' legacy. Regardless of fame, Colonel James Dennis will forever remain the man who bested the Star of Africa, not once, but twice. It's the 17th of January, 1945, in the outskirts of the French town of Herlesheim. A German motorcycle races across open ground. Obersturmführer Erwin Bachmann holds on to the sidecar, Panzerfaust in hand. The fighting in the area has been brutal, and the Panzer Company fighting for the town has lost contact with high command. Scanning the scenery, Bachmann spots something. 2 Panther tanks right on the edge of town. There they are! The motorcycle approaches the parked tanks. The driver stops by the soldiers as Bachmann hurriedly asks, "What are you doing? Where's your commander?" The commander is right there, sitting against a wall, wounded and covered in bandages. Bachmann asks him, "What is the situation?" To which the commander explains they were pushed back by a force of Shermans, which remain somewhere nearby inside the town. Bachmann is steadfast in his response. "We will hunt them down. Men, follow me!" Back in France, Bachmann leads the 2 Panther tanks into the war-torn town of Herlesheim, riding shotgun in the sidecar. Bachmann is holding the Panzerfaust at the ready. Head on over to yarnhubstore.com to shop our latest designs and be the envy of all your friends. They approach a junction, and Bachmann orders a convoy to a stop. Walks the last few feet, hugging the wall of the buildings before peeking down the road. Nothing. He signals his Panthers forward and orders them to take position on the town square. With the tanks in position, he turns to their commanders and informs them he's going to explore on foot. The 2 men look at each other but say nothing as their superior walks away, alone and with nothing but a pistol. Bachmann walks for a couple of blocks. It's deeply unsettling. The homes all around him sport heavy damage with windows blown out and even collapsed walls. He comes to a 90-degree turn on the road and rounds the corner. Bachmann freezes as just before him are 2 parked Sherman tanks with their crews. The Americans spot him and he hears them shout. They scatter and pull out their Thompson machine guns. Bachmann runs for his life. Shots ricochet on the cobblestones, but he escapes back around the corner as shots ring out behind him. Back at the Panthers, both commanders are keeping a careful eye on their field of fire when they suddenly spot Bachmann running back in haste, shouting, "Shamans!" Bachmann goes straight for the Panzerfaust as the Panther commanders prepare to move. "What are your orders?" But the Obersturmführer fears the Americans will encircle them. "Hold your position. I'll make them come to us." He runs back up to the bend on the road and spots a hole in the wall in the corner. Thinking quickly, he sneaks inside searching for a firing spot. Luck smiles on Bachmann and he finds a window with a clear view of a Sherman tank. They're still parked exactly where they were, but the American soldiers are gone, probably having taken position inside their machines. Carefully, he shoulders a weapon and takes aim at the lead tank. He slows his breathing. He's only got 1 shot at this. With the enemy square in his sights, he gently squeezes the trigger. The weapon fires with a deafening boom, launching the shaped-charged rocket straight at the enemy. It smashes into its side armor, and the warhead detonates. The power of the explosion punches straight through. Chaos breaks among the Shermans, but Bachmann doesn't wait around and makes his way out as quick as he can. He runs for his tanks, barking orders to push and attack. Under Bachmann's orders, a Panther sets off up the right-hand street to engage the Americans head-on. Meanwhile, Bachmann on foot and the second Panther move up the left-hand street. The tank creeps up Rue de l'Église with Bachmann trotting at the left. A church bell strikes. 3 p.m. Across the street, with perfect timing, Berger's cannon approaches the front of the American column. It inches forward and sees the column of a smoking Sherman at the front. But behind, the Americans are bunched up. He attempts to target a Sherman, and on the strike of the third bell, the gunner lets loose. The shell erupts from the Panther. The shot misses, but runs down the line of Shermans. There's panic. The Shermans under attack in the narrow streets try to maneuver for position, scraping each other in the buildings. They try and get in a position to return fire. Behind the Americans across the street, Bachmann and the tank commander, Molrat, hear the battle. The Panther driver hits the gas, leaving Bachmann in the dust, but it's a perfect pincer movement. Now, behind the Shermans, the other Panther approaches the corner. The gunner quickly targets the rear of a Sherman. The gunner fires. Panther shell impacts and catches a Sherman from behind, blasting its engine housing. Bachmann sprints to the corner to see the American crew evacuating the burning Sherman. The Panther's turret swings around. The commander is eager to bag another. The Shermans that were backing up hit the brakes as they realize they're now under attack from front and rear. But then, just as the Panther is about to fire, Bachmann orders, "Halt!" In the dust of battle, an American officer waves something white. It looks like his undershirt. Bachmann said, "I quickly told Molrat to radio Berger and tell him to hold fire." He said, "I walked out into the center of the street and looked up and down the column of American tanks. There were 6 of them, not including the burning tank. The Americans were penned in and their guns were useless in their tight column disposition. Molrat got down from his tank to assist me in the roundup. He brandished his Schmeiser submachine gun, even though he was outnumbered 60-1. Suddenly, Bachmann sees Molrat running towards him, white as a ghost. "There's more!" Pointing to the side street, they're shocked to see another 6 Shermans. The crews are, thankfully, all surrendering. Thinking that they too were boxed in by a superior German force, instead of just 2 Panthers. One of the American tankers spoke some German and stepped forward. Bachmann asked, "Are there any more surprises?" The interpreter pointed to a side yard in which a group of 20 German prisoners from the 553rd Volksgrenadier Division, 12 Shermans and 20 prisoners. Bachmann said, "I took charge of the group and ordered them to pick up the American weapons and to keep them as their own. I considered what to do with the windfall of American tanks at a time when Germany had so few of its own. The drivers stepped to the front of the American prisoners. I told them they were going to drive their tanks to a German base. As motivation, I would place a German soldier armed with a pistol behind each driver." When the dust settled, Bachmann's actions with just 2 Panthers resulted in the capture of 60 American tank crew members, the release of 20 German POWs, and the capture of 12 completely intact Sherman tanks. Erwin Bachmann volunteered to be in the SS in August 1939. We removed SS insignia from the uniform, as we often do due to monetization issues on some platforms. However, Bachmann was SS and, per the Nuremberg trials, a war criminal. The captured Shermans would go on to serve for the German army, being used in anger against the Allies in the dying months of the war. Erwin Bachmann would survive the war and passed away on the 18th of February, 2010. It's a dark, foggy morning on May the 24th, 1941, off the coast of Iceland. Task Force Commander Gunter Lutyens stares out of the bridge into the darkness. He is an experienced officer, strict and calculating, a man of few words, yet effective leadership. But today, under his hard shell, fear and concern for his men is ever present. He has orders to reach the Atlantic and raid cargo vessels headed for Britain. For this task, he has the most feared ship in Europe under his command, the flagship of the German Navy, the terror of the seas, the Bismarck. Alongside them is the Prince Eugen, a heavy cruiser powerful in its own right. Back on the Bismarck, Lutyens was not feeling the grand ship's power. If anything, it only made him more tense. She is mighty, but the Royal Navy has the numbers. With less than half the force initially intended for this mission, Lutyens was feeling very much vulnerable. A tense atmosphere hangs over the bridge. They know their hopes of reaching the Atlantic undetected were all but shattered after 2 brief encounters with enemy vessels. Hydrophones now report hearing heavy ships. It seems it no longer is a matter of if they'll be intercepted, but when. Lutyens watches the horizon with his binoculars when the signal officer calls his attention. "Smoke trails spotted on the horizon, sir." Lutyens looks out the window. The dreaded fight had come. "Call the crew to battle stations," he orders. Alarms ring in both vessels, and the crews scramble to their posts as 2 battleships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the mighty HMS Hood, appear over the horizon. The range is 26 kilometers and closing when the first muzzle flash from the enemy vessels pierces the morning darkness, signaling the incoming shells. Lutyens simply watches as massive towers of water rise in front of the Prince Eugen, the shells falling short. Bismarck Captain Ernst Lindemann calls to Lutyens, "Permission to open fire." He receives no response. Lutyens is weighing his options. He knows Bismarck is quick, and engaging the Royal Navy is the last thing he wants with his reduced force. Maybe there's a chance he can outrun them. More shells fall around the vessels. "Permission to open fire," repeats Lindemann, increasingly agitated. The enemies are getting closer. There's no outrunning this. Lutyens relents. Open fire. The thunder of the guns reverberates throughout the ship as they propel the massive 15-inch shells across the sky and screaming towards the Hood. They miss and impact the sea. The flagship of the Kriegsmarine and the pride of the Royal Navy trade blows. The HMS Hood is hit by the Prince Eugen, starting a fire that is quickly contained. A massive bang reverberates through the Bismarck. "We've been hit," an officer reports. Lutyens doesn't react. Bismarck fires its 5th salvo, and it strikes the Hood. A fateful shot to send shockwaves throughout the British Empire. A column of fire lights up the night sky, rising from the deck like a blowtorch before a catastrophic explosion tears the ship in half. In a final act of defiance, a single shot is fired from the doomed ship before it sinks under the waves. Relief washes over the Bismarck's crew, some allowing themselves a brief cheer as the battle turns in their favor. Lutyens, however, is unmoved, and in his characteristic cold demeanor, he orders to immediately focus fire on the Prince of Wales. The turrets swing towards the new target, and they fire, sending 8 1,760-pound shells streaking across the sky towards the remaining enemy. Lookouts report multiple hits on target as the fight progresses, but the HMS Prince of Wales soldiers on. The Bismarck is struck 2 more times herself until the Prince of Wales finally retreats from the battle. "Let's chase them down," suggests Lindemann, but Lutyens refuses, sticking to his orders of engaging the Royal Navy as little as possible. He orders to continue on instead. Bismarck has suffered damage on the floatplane crane, torpedo bulkhead, and on the forecastle. She begins to flood and oil leaks into the ocean. As the damage reports come in, Lutyens learns that the repairs are badly needed. Despite this, he refuses to slow the ship to get them done, as he knows at least 2 heavy cruisers are shadowing him. They need to get some distance first. What's clear is that the Bismarck is too wounded to continue the mission. They need to get back to port. Prince Eugen is undamaged. So Lutyens decides that the Prince Eugen will detach from the Bismarck and continue the mission alone, while Bismarck heads to Saint-Nazaire for repairs. With some breathing room, Lutyens sends a report to the OKM, the Naval High Command. Battlecruiser, probably Hood, sunk. Another battleship, King George V or Renown, turned away, damaged. 2 heavy cruisers maintain contact. Meanwhile, far above, a British Sunderland flying boat follows Bismarck's oil streak until spotting the ship. They report her position, and the British gather all available warships to hunt her down. With the weather worsening, Lutyens decides it's a good moment to detach Prince Eugen. The 2 ships part ways, seeing each other for the last time. The darkness falls upon the Atlantic when an officer alerts Lutyens. "Lookouts report incoming planes, Admiral." Lutyens orders the men to battle stations and the secondary guns to be turned to maximum depression on the direction of the planes. Alarms sound in the Bismarck. The sky is lit up with anti-aircraft fire as swordfish torpedo bombers line up their passes. Lutyens orders to fire the secondary guns into the sea in front of the path of the planes. The splash of the shells creates pillars of water that they must evade, but it's of no use. The torpedoes are away, and the planes successfully escape, not a single one shot down. Lindemann orders evasive maneuvers, but despite them, just one of the 9 torpedoes impacts the armor belt. It does little damage, but the abrupt direction change and maneuvers loosen the collision mats covering the hole from the previous battle. Bismarck starts to flood one more time and is forced to slow down to fix the repair, giving the British much needed time. The Bismarck is given some luck as the British lose track of her while trying to avoid German submarines. Lutyens, meanwhile, continues to send reports back to shore. Believing he's being shadowed, he sees no point in maintaining radio silence. Unbeknownst to him, the messages are being used by the British to continue the chase even beyond the radar range. But they make yet another mistake, and the closest pursuers sail the wrong way. Time was running out though for the Germans, and in the morning of May the 26th, a Catalina finds the battleship. That night, another swordfish raid swoops upon the Bismarck. Alarms blare one more time, and the crew repeat the strategy of the morning. Anti-aircraft fire lights up the night sky as the torpedo bombers approach. The seemingly obsolete swordfish are flying so low and slow. Bismarck's fire control predictors built for newer planes have a hard time giving accurate predictions, and heavy AA guns struggle tracking them. Even when hit, the German fire passes through the old string bags. The plumes of water made by the secondary guns, while ingenious, proves little more than a nuisance for the attackers. The bombers drop their payloads, and the fish are away. Lindemann orders evasive maneuvers, but it's too late. A torpedo impacts a midship and does little, but a second explodes right on the rudder, jamming it. The swordfish fly away, leaving the vessel alive, but wounded. Repairs are attempted and they successfully fix one of the 2 rudders. But despite their best attempts, it's not enough. An hour later, Lutyens reports the ship is unmaneuverable. It's now stuck at sea, sailing in circles. What little maneuverability they have left results in little more than wobbles. Mood on board darkens quickly as the realization of their likely fate sets in. At 1 a.m. on May the 27th, Lutyens transmits for the final time. "We will fight to the last, believing in you, my Führer, and with rock-hard trust in Germany's victory." The ship is harassed throughout the night by enemy destroyers, but the true danger wouldn't come until the morning, in the form of HMS Rodney and HMS King George V. Alarms sound on board as the crew board their battle stations, determined to fight till the end. Muzzle flashes shine from Rodney and water splashes fall short of the Bismarck. Lutyens orders to open fire. Bismarck fights back, but the unsteady course makes it difficult to find range and fire accurately. Lutyens can do little but watch as the enemy shells land closer and closer with each shot. Then, Rodney fires a salvo,
and everything goes dark. The shell impacts right on the forward superstructure, decimating the bridge. All of the top command die in the blast. Bismarck continues to fight under the command of lower officers, but it's of no effect. The unstable ship doesn't allow the remaining sailors to fire a straight shot, and Rodney continues to punish the vessel mercilessly. Fire consumes the ship, and the guns are put out of action one by one. By 9:30, Bismarck has fired for the final time. The British ships close in, continuing to fire unopposed. The vessel has fallen under the command of the chief of the damage repair stations, who reluctantly orders to set scuttling charges and abandon ship. By 10 a.m., Bismarck has been reduced to a floating, burning wreck. The charges are set off 20 minutes later, and Bismarck, the pride of the Kriegsmarine, sinks into the ocean. Out of the 2,200 young men on board serving, only 114 are pulled alive from the water.
It's the 30th of June 1944, and one of Finland's legendary flying knights gets behind an enemy P-39 and opens fire. The Soviet pilot spots a tracer zipping past and instantly dives to evade. The pilot, Ilmari Juutalainen, follows suit, both aircraft plunging towards the ground. The Soviet pilot attempting to evade the Finns' precise volleys to no avail. Ilmari dumps round after round of his machine guns into the enemy plane, saving his cannon ammunition until the perfect moment. The airspeed indicator keeps climbing, the altimeter dropping fast. He switches to his cannons and pushes the trigger. A barrage of 20mm is launched across the air, the shell slamming straight into the rear of the P-39 and shredding its tail. The remains of the tail zip past his cockpit, narrowly missing him before he pulls off the chase. He looks back at his prey and watches as it crashes into a village below. But he has no time to worry about the people on the ground. He pulls up, scanning the skies for a fight. He immediately spots his enemy as another of the P-39s flies past his nose, escaping the brawl with the rest of Ilmari's squadron. Ilmari gets on the chase, pulling up behind it in pursuit. The enemy notices him and tries to turn to evade, but Ilmari fires a single cannon round. It strikes square into the middle of the enemy's fuselage, striking the engine and engulfing the machine in flames. He leaves the enemy to its fate and turns back to catch up with the rest of his flight, which by now is pursuing the remaining Airacobras as they flee for the Soviet border. He's far back, watching his friends in hot pursuit ahead. Another P-39 turns into a fireball and falls earthbound. But then he gets a bad feeling. That cloud he had seen a while back had been odd. He looks back and spots it on the horizon. Ilmari looks closer. His eyes go wide. That's not a cloud. It's a bomber formation. Dozens of Yak-9s, leading more than 100 PE-2 bombers between the formation of Ale-5 Lavochkin fighters keep escort, and behind it, even more Yak-9s fill the air. It's the worst thing they could have possibly stumbled upon, but Ilmari doesn't doubt for a second.
Forget the Cobras. There's bombers on the horizon. Follow me!
The flight turns for battle. Climbing high above the formation and side by side with his wingman, they dive upon the first flight of Yak-9s they see, charging straight into the enemy with their allies hot on their heels. The Soviet fighters dive away and Ilmari chases them down. They turn left and right in evasive action, but Ilmari carefully takes aim and opens fire. The barrage immediately cuts down the enemy, shaving off its wing and sending it tumbling into the earth. The second Yak increases his dive, desperate to escape using its superior top speed. The Finn lets it go, more focused on the bombers. He rises back into the melee where the rest of the Finnish flight is busy with a flurry of Yaks, just when a burning Soviet aircraft flies right past his nose. Ilmari looks over at the bombers and sees them opening their bomb bays. Below them, the town of Juustila comes closer. He slams the throttle to full and races for the formation, but a flight of 4 Yak-9s turns to meet him. Ilmari and his wingman are forced off their attack run, maneuvering away from the crosshairs of the pouncing Reds. They split away, each hounded by 2 yaks hot on their heels. Ilmari twists and turns in the air, playing his 109 to all its strengths. In the fight, he catches a glimpse of the PE-2s dropping columns of ordnance. He continues with evasive action, crisscrossing left and right, until the Soviet pilot makes a fatal mistake. He overshoots, and Ilmari pounces on the opportunity. He sweeps behind the yak, and the enemy dives to escape. Ilmari follows the all-too-familiar maneuver. The pair are picking up speed towards the ground as explosions rock the town below them. Ilmari prepares his shot. He has him right where he wants him. The volley is short and deadly, cutting straight through the enemy's fuselage. It bursts into flames and spins out of control, becoming one more explosion in the war-torn land. Ilmari rises back into the sky. The bombers and their escorts are long gone. He looks at the ground and sees the dust lingering above the bombed town. He thinks to himself, there's not much we can do now. But that's not the end of their day. The night's flight regroups over the town. Not one of them had been shot down. Even Ilmari's wingman, who also had 2 yaks on his tail, came out on top. They're flying back to base when they are once again faced with the call of duty. Another formation of Soviet bombers appears through the clouds. Even more PE-2s, but this time accompanied by Il-2 Shturmovik ground attackers and Lavochkin 5 escorts. Ilmari glances at his fuel. It's marginal. They'd be taking a big risk if they attack this formation. Full of determination, they turn into battle for the 3rd time. Ilmari leads the charge, diving to the attack with a PE-2 square in his crosshairs. His finger hovers over the trigger when he spots a Lavochkin 5 sweeping in behind him. In a rush, Ilmari pulls out of the dive and turns away as the Soviet aircraft speeds past underneath him. Incredulous, he looks back to see the Lavochkin flying away at speed. The underpowered LA-5 was no match for Utilainen's Bf-109G6. Many Soviet pilots were inexperienced at this time and hastily trained, but by using his speed to break from the attack and get back to defending the bombers, this pilot most likely avoided becoming another statistic on Ilmari's victory tally, at least for now. Ilmari is unsure as to why the pilot made a run for it, later joking,
He must have been in a hurry.
Then his low fuel warning lights up. He must make his way back to base, but more bombers are right there. Just below him, an Il-2 Shturmovik is following along the road. The Shturmovik lines up its target, releasing rockets and guns at the Finnish positions. Ilmari just can't stand by and do nothing. Despite his fuel being low, he makes a decision. He's going in. He turns and dives to intercept. Swooping in from above, his 20mm volley strikes the Shturmovik. Ilmari's aim is deadly, and his shots rip through the wing and engulf the Soviet plane in a ball of flame. The Shturmovik turns out of control and crashes violently into the Finnish forest. Ilmari turns away for home, but the Lavochkin 5 that Ilmari saw breaking off from before returns in hot pursuit. This time, it seems, he won't be breaking away from the fight. This was to be his 6th and last dogfight of the day. In his book, he describes the fight in detail like this. Again, one LA-5 appeared behind me. I pushed the throttle open and started a climbing turn. My pursuer stayed inside my turn, trying to pull a proper deflection, while I rolled away, a little more over it. Now the enemy pilot had to pull more, and he got his nose towards me, but not ahead of me. I guessed that he would try to shoot anyway, and he did. He tested his guns at a range under 100 yards. His tracers, of course, went behind me due to lack of deflection. I waved my hand to him to show, "You're missing!" I had nothing to worry about, because I beat him in the climb by 330 feet when we got to 13,000 feet. And then we would see what happened. He was falling steadily farther behind because I was making him pull to the inside of the turn and maintain a higher bank angle, and due to his continuous efforts to draw deflection and shoot. I rolled my fighter into a steeper and more nose-high turn, and he followed. Then I rolled inverted over the top of him. This startled my opponent, and he rolled nimbly over at his small speed and began a vertical dive. This was what I had been waiting for. I pulled my stick back and went into a vertical dive in pursuit. I made some small corrections with ailerons, and we dropped like stones for 7,000 feet. Then it was time to pull up. The target slipped into the climb so quickly that I didn't have time to shoot. The recovery and pull-up were so tight that I blacked out momentarily. When my vision returned, we were going up vertically and then, via half loop, down again. This sequence was repeated several times until, in one vertical pull-up, when the target was pulling nearly inverted at the top, I pulled tightly, expecting a stall at this low speed. The target was well in my gun sight and the deflection was proper. I shot. Flames flashed out of the airplane, although the tracers seemed to have gone into the cockpit, but I must have hit the fuel tank. Ilmari Juutalainen would land back at base, running on fumes, along with the rest of his squadron, with not a single hit to his plane. It was his most successful day of the war, raking in 6 victories. He was offered a promotion for his actions, but turned it down, fearing it would keep him from fighting. The war would end just 3 months later, with Finland forced to cede territory to the Soviets. But thanks to the actions of Juutalainen and many other brave soldiers like him, Finland kept its independence. Incredibly, he finished the war without a single shot to hit his plane from an enemy fighter. We'd like to thank the Finnish Aviation Museum for their help in sourcing the research we used in this film.
It's October the 19th, 1972. Farmers on the northern shore of Lubang Island in the Philippines are running for their lives. In this serene setting, they've glimpsed a terrifying sight emerge from the jungle. Now, coming towards them through the fields, are 2 Japanese men in tattered military uniforms, firing shots into the air. These men are something from another time. Second Lieutenant Hiro Onoda and Private First Class Kinshichi Kazuka of the Imperial Japanese Army. Frightened though the farmers are, they have become somewhat used to this bizarre and dangerous situation. If Onoda and Kazuka look like something from another era, that's because they are. The pair have been on the island nearly 3 decades and, believe it or not, think the Second World War is still going on. One farmer fetches the police. As the authorities approach Onoda and Kazuka, they are busy taking whatever supplies they can get their hands on. There used to be a group of 4. Private Yuichi Akatsu didn't have the staying power of the other men and deserted in 1949, and Shoichi Shimada had been shot in 1954. The fatal mistake the Japanese soldiers make is to try and burn one more pile of rice. As the food goes up in flames, it gives the police just the time they need to close in. A gun battle breaks out. Kazuka is struck in the shoulder. Thinking his comrade and friend is dead, Onoda slips back into the forest. The police give chase, but Onoda mounts into the forest like a ghost. This game of cat and mouse has been going on since 1945 on this tiny island of just 45 square miles. On February the 28th, 1945, the Americans started the recapture of Lubang. Initially, ships fired barrages while the planes bombed the Japanese positions. Left behind by the retreating Japanese forces, Onoda was to head up a cell that would continue to fight a guerrilla war. His commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, had ordered him in 1945 to never surrender. Forbidding those Japanese left behind to die by their own hand, they were to continue the struggle against the enemy until the victorious Imperial Japanese Army returned. Unfortunately for Onoda and his men, Taniguchi himself surrendered shortly afterwards. Onoda's only option was to retreat into the mountains, where the men were on constant alert for survival and for the opportunity to create mayhem. As the war ended, B-17s dropped leaflets to convince the holdout soldiers to surrender. The leaflets contained an order from General Yamashita, give themselves up and surrender. But orders dropped from American planes? It must be subterfuge, an American trick to fool the Emperor's loyal soldiers. Onoda and his men lived a tough life, maintaining military discipline day in, day out. Always on the move, they lived in temporary huts made of bamboo and mainly survived on such treats as boiled bananas. The men were able to supplement their diet by stealing from the natives of Lubang, occasionally shooting a cow and drying the meat. Every year, the men went through a ceremony, bowing in the direction of the emperor's palace and reaffirming their commitment to continue to follow their orders and continue to fight the war. Though, with the passing of time, through death, injury, or desertion, Onoda is finally on his own. The most dedicated of all the men deals with this challenge like every other, dogged determination to follow his orders, conserving ammunition and still taking the battle to the enemy. Of course, all the locals were American spies and deserved to be attacked, didn't they? The locals were terrorized. Many died at the hands of Onoda and his men, and many attempts were made to convince him to surrender. Onoda has received excellent intelligence training, but they've trained him too well, leaving him to see everything as propaganda and consider all strangers his enemy. Leaflets are dropped, photos are displayed, personal messages are written. All of these bounce off Onoda, who treats the communications as elaborate fakes made by American spies. At one stage, his own brother, Toshio, tries to bring him out of hiding by singing a song they used to know as students. Because Toshio is upset, his voice breaks during the strange jungle-bound performance. Listening intently and hiding, Onoda takes this as proof of a trickster who isn't able to impersonate Toshio's voice properly. Eventually, the responsibility for finding Onoda rests on one man, Norio Suzuki. Suzuki is a young adventurer. As well as Onoda, he's looking to track down a panda and a yeti on his travels. It's 1974. Just 4 days into his epic search, Suzuki comes face to face with Onoda. The seasoned soldier sneaks up on the intruder, aiming his rifle. Suzuki says his prayers expecting the worst, but fortunately for him, there's one small detail that saves his life. His socks. Onoda notices the young man's inappropriate dress code of socks and rubber shoes. It's a clear sign the man is just a tourist of some kind, and so, after all these years, Onoda decides to trust him. He told this hippie boy that if he were to receive an order to surrender from a superior officer, his war would finally end. Traveling to the Philippines, Taniguchi finally gives Onoda the order to surrender in a ceremony. President Marcos pardons Onoda for the deaths of up to 50 local people and the injury of over 100 more. His military service now over, he is able to return home to Japan. The Japan of the 1970s isn't a huge surprise to the 50-year-old Onoda. He and Kazuka stole a transistor radio in the 60s where they heard all about jet planes and color television. At the time, they assumed that many of the details were invented, but now he knows the fantasy is in fact reality. He was received in Japan as a hero, particularly from the older generation. There were queues of people lining up to meet the brave soldier whose strength of character and duty caused him to keep fighting a war that had long finished. He became the center of attention and wrote a book about his story. The younger generation weren't so sure. Was he a brave soldier or a fanatic who crossed the line? A reported 30 people were killed during that post-war period, with 100 injured. Onoda himself questioned the wisdom of his own actions. He later said, "I cursed myself for just causing trouble all those years." Troubled by the attention and the fact that the philosophy of Japan had changed so much during his time in the jungle, he retreated from the public eye and moved to Brazil to be near his brother. Living a long and fruitful life, the old soldier finally passed away in just 2014 at the age of 91.
Please like and comment on the video, and also subscribe and help us get to 1 million subscribers. Thank you. It's November the 8th, 2019, and deep within the jungles of Thailand, a determined team scour the steep slopes of Doi American. It means American Mountain. Part of the team is Major Daniel Jackson of the US Air Force and Air Chief Marshal Sakpanit Promtep of the Royal Thai Air Force. The mountain's name hints towards a long-forgotten relic of war and a lost soul, both part of a remarkable story that has inspired Daniel and Sakpanit to make the expedition to this site.
I don't know why, but I have a really strong feeling we should check over there.
Quiet settles on the group as they focus on their search, but the silence is suddenly pierced by the squealing of Daniel's detector.
Oh my god. I found something.
He signals the team and drops to the ground, digging carefully.
I can't believe it. We found it.
From the depths of the thick earth, he pulls something man-made. A 9-inch piece of metal lined with bolts. Attached, a data plate with the inscription, Drain Boss, 5 amp, 24 volt, out motor. This piece of metal is no ordinary scrap. It's a piece from a P-51C Mustang. But what is an American World War II fighter plane doing in the middle of the Thai jungle? And why is this wreck so important? It's November the 11th, 1944. 5 Thai fighters are in the air. The Royal Thai Air Force pilots scour the skies on the urgent lookout for the enemy. American planes. These pilots, also very close friends, have split into the 2 groups to cover more area. It doesn't take long before Flight Lieutenant Chelemgiat Watanangora spots 8 American aircraft ahead. But there are a lot of them.
This is Gold Leader.
The American formation is of 16 planes in 3 layers. 4 P-51C Mustangs down low to strafe, 4 P-51C Mustangs in the middle to cover the strafers, and 1 P-51C Mustang and 7 P-38J Lightnings as top cover. Chelemgiat grits his teeth. He signals to Flight Sergeant Wad Santornkomo beside him. There's no time to wait for the others. He's going in to engage. He thrusts his joystick forward and dives straight at a group of the enemy planes. The American side is made up of P-51 Mustangs and P-38 Lightnings, powerful modern aircraft with cutting-edge capabilities. But the Thais field the Nakajima Ki-27B, which they affectionately nickname Sparrow. The Sparrows are completely outclassed in this conflict. Originally built by the Japanese in 1938, they're slow, with fixed-wheel undercarriages and armed with only 2 rifle-caliber machine guns. Chelemgiat shoots first. In slow motion, the bullets stream out towards the P-38s. His aim is true, and fire rips into one of the P-38s. It passes through the fuel tank on the right wing, and the P-38 catches fire and is forced to turn away. But as he tries to edge to target another plane, the Americans return fire with a wall of lead. It's totally one-sided, and he feels his aircraft rocked as bullets slam into the undercarriage. Then, the engine cowling is totally shot away. The smell of burning hits him as his engine blooms into fire. The aircraft lurches underneath him, and he dives away. The fight's over, and there's nothing he can do about it. He checks his 6. The Americans are carrying on with the mission. Fortunately for him, he can get down. He checks for the nearest airfield. Spotting Lampang airfield below, there's no choice but for him to set down there. Faced with few options, Chelemgiat resolves to use a falling leaf maneuver, carefully using his rudder to coax the plane into side-to-side motion, slowly dropping towards the ground with each traverse. The earth rushes up to meet him as he drops closer and closer towards land. There's a violent crash as Chelemgiat's Sparrow makes contact, and his damaged undercarriage causes his wheel to dig into the ground, throwing up dust and dirt. He barely has time to register the successful landing before he realizes that the airfield is under attack from the strafing P-51s. The second he comes to a stop, Chelemgiat jumps out and starts to run, clearing his Sparrow, when he suddenly remembers he's left his valuable parachute still inside the aircraft. He turns back and reaches to grab it from the cockpit, jumping down just as a deafening crack of machine gun fire fills the air. Chelemgiat is hit, and his Sparrow is in flames, but out of nowhere, a sturdily built airman grabs Chelemgiat, hoists him up, and sprints for cover, just as the Sparrow erupts in an explosion, finally defeated. 1 TIE fighter is down. 4 remain. Back above, Wad Santornkamal watches as smoke rises from the runway, hoping his friend made it out. He did what he could to keep the enemy distracted, and now he searches for a target from the plentiful selection of enemy combatants eager to take him down. He sees 4 planes, 3 P-38s and 1 P-51C Mustang, and decides he's going in. He uses his height advantage to tweak as much speed as he can from his Sparrow, and fires. The Americans break and are all over him. He glances into his mirror and spots another P-51 glued to his tail, preparing to fire. Wad freezes. Time slows for just a moment, and then instinct kicks in. He wrenches his joystick, nimbly pulling out, just as the 4 .50 caliber machine guns light up, sending a heavy storm of lead down range. Narrowly dodging the rain of fire, Wad swings around, only to see the other enemy aircraft coming in from all angles. But refusing to be shaken, he opens fire on the closest one, but the chatter of his machine guns is drowned out by the roar of the Americans' guns. Another hailstorm of bullets zips towards him, and this time they find their mark. Wad's fuel tank is hit and ignites, engulfing him in flames. The inferno takes hold instantly as he scrambles to unbuckle himself. The flames burn his skin, and the Sparrow begins to plummet. But through the pain and increasing G-force, he manages to get up, heave the canopy back. He can't afford hesitation. Wad jumps, just clearing the tail of the plane. The sound of air rushes past Wad's ears. It's deafening as he struggles to catch his breath with the force of it. He pulls at the cord on his parachute, and thankfully, it opens. He's gritting his teeth through the pain. The quiet is broken by the approaching sound of an engine droning louder and louder. A Mustang comes into sight, heading straight for him. Thousands of feet in the air, there's nothing Wad can do but watch it come for him. The Mustang bears right down upon him, the dark, uncompromising barrels of its 4 machine guns staring into him. Wad can't bear it and closes his eyes, the engine roaring in his ears louder and louder. He braces himself. Then, quiet. The roaring engine fades. A gentle breeze rushes in Wad's ears as he continues to fall gently towards the jungle. He cautiously opens one eye to see the Mustang climbing away out of sight. 3 more Mustangs fly by soon after, but make no attempt to attack Wad. Instead, the American pilots are curious to get a closer look at the face of their foe, peering at him through their canopies before offering a salute and flying away. Wad waves back a goodbye as they fade into the distance. Another TIE pilot is down. 3 TIE fighters remain. Sergeant Tada Beokaimuk is infuriated. They were supposed to have taken off together, but due to engine trouble on his Sparrow, he was lagging behind. But now, he's in the fray, mixing it up with the 3 P-38s and a Mustang. Tada is unfazed, instead barreling head-on at a P-51. Both planes fire right at each other, and the bullets from either side cross in mid-air. Through the intense fire, Tada becomes aware of bullets passing right by his head, but none hit him or the plane. He's spurred on by the success of his charge. He searches for more targets, passing close to multiple enemy aircraft, only for them to evade him by moving aside and upwards. Too distracted by chasing enemy aircraft, Tada suddenly realizes he's been on a straight course for too long, leaving an opportunity for the enemy to loop round behind him. He quickly yanks the joystick to turn around, just as 3 P-38s dive down on him from above. Tada thinks quickly and opens full throttle, rushing at another group of enemy fighters, diving beneath them at the last minute. Using his slower but more nimble Sparrow, he's able to outmaneuver the Americans, slipping beneath the enemy aircraft and using them as cover. Unbeknownst to Tada, TIE airmen on the ground watch him as he opens fire on the enemy aircraft on the American squadron. They're in awe of Tada's fearlessness and nimble maneuvers. They cheer him on as a single Sparrow breaks up the American formation and the enemy pilots attempt to respond. Tada presses an attack on an American flying ahead, but this time, it's a trick. Another maneuvers behind him and opens fire. Bullets stream down on Tada. One pierces the canopy, streaking past his head and hitting his gun sight and spiraling through his oil tank. Oil sprays across the cockpit as another bullet strikes one of his machine guns, jamming it. Slick with oil, injured, and with only one machine gun left, Tada knows it's over. Content with having done his best, he shuts down the engine and makes a dive out of the action for a nearby rice paddy. All 3 aircraft from the first group are down. The last 2 TIE fighters in the air are Pilot Officer Kamrok Blienkam and Flight Sergeant 3rd Class Chuladit Dekanchorn. The 2 pilots have been directed northeast by the ground crew using a cloth in the shape of an arrow near the airfield. Soon enough, the group of 3 P-38 Lightnings and a Mustang appear. Chuladit looks to his flight leader, and Kamrok nods. The men know the odds. Pushing fear from their minds, they open the throttle. Chuladit makes straight to intercept them. In his excitement, he effectively takes charge of the flight. But Camrock is unbothered. Pecking order becomes a meaningless idea when in the face of action. The two pilots climb higher and higher until at 4,500 meters, Chuladit closes his eyes and takes a split second to utter a prayer as he prepares his guns. Chuladit opens his eyes. He pulls on the trigger and opens fire across the enemy leader while Camrock attacks the rest of the enemy aircraft. Once again, the Americans are thrown into disarray. The formation breaks up and a dogfight begins. Camrock instinctively covers his friend, firing at a P-38 that tries to pursue Chuladit. In the chaos, bullets fly all around Chuladit, but somehow miss him and his aircraft. He takes a moment to thank the Lord Buddha for blessing him. Planes on both sides are hit. But Chuladit suddenly feels his plane pitch violently, as if rocked by unseen forces. Chuladit grapples for control as his plane rolls uncontrollably due to the prop wash of the enemy planes. He's in a death spin. The Mustang tries its luck as Chuladit is still spinning, but the shots miss due to the plane's erratic whirling. Finally, his plane starts to ease back into level flight, and Chuladit begins to recover. Although he has little time to do so, the fight descends to 2,500 meters as Chuladit tries to bring the enemy down to an easier altitude. He finds himself battling with a Mustang all the way. It seems like every plane exchanges fire with him as the sky is flooded with deafening gunfire, and Chuladit's cockpit is engulfed in the putrid scent of sulfur. But he never stops, never stays still, weaving and dodging so much, the enemy conserve their fire. Confident and triumphant, Chuladit fearlessly turns around and flies up to meet a diving Mustang. The two open fire and tracers pass each other through the air as Chuladit prays once more. As he closes his eyes, there's a bang from the front of his engine, and a sparrow shakes twice as the engine dies. He opens his eyes as the glide downwards begins. The enemy Mustang notices and attempts to chase the drifting plane, but Chuladit's prayers are once again answered as anti-aircraft fire on the ground forces the Mustang away. Chuladit comes down hard and fast, slamming loudly into a rice paddy at the end of the runway, before coasting into a termite mound. The plane cartwheels over the mound and throws him out of his seat, knocking him unconscious. He can't even tell how much time has passed by the time he wakes up, struggling to open his eyes to find himself lying in a muddy drainage ditch. He stares at the sky and wonders what happened to his fellow pilots and his partner Camrock. 4 down, 1 left. Camrock is the last man standing. He fights his battle alone. Separated from his wingman during the start of the dogfight, Camrock struggles to get into an advantageous position. He uses tricks combined with the Sparrow's agility to stay in the air, dropping beneath one fighter and rolling to avoid the fire of another. He's on his own though, and he knows his best bet is to head for the mountains and use his superior maneuverability. He's flown a lot down there before, and he knows the topography. If he can get low, perhaps he can outwit his opponent. Camrock breathes deeply, pushes forward on the yoke, and dives, now pursued by a lone P-51. He gets down to a jungle-covered ridgeline, speeding along it all the while, trying to dodge the fire of the P-51 on his tail. He sees bullets fly past him and makes out a trench leading to the mountain in the distance. He slips into the trench, weaving through the jungle and rocks, all the while his pursuer in tow. Inside the P-51, Second Lieutenant Henry F. Minko curses as he tries to land a hit on the enemy, but Camrock continues to weave and dodge masterfully. The pilot of the P-51 breathes, waits, and times his fire. It's a hit. Bullets strike the Sparrow, hitting the parachute and footrest and casting shrapnel into Camrock's right leg. Camrock instantly loses feeling in his leg and the ability to properly control his aircraft. Unable to properly maneuver, he's easy prey now, and the enemy moves in for the kill. He tries to fight the pain, determined he won't die like this. The pain in his leg is searing, and the P-51 roars savagely behind him, but he remains focused. Camrock can't fight back or escape. There's nowhere to hide, even if he broke to try and run and escape. The Mustang with twice his speed would surely catch him. Coming to the end of the trench run, he takes his Sparrow in a straight line, right at the mountain. Henry Minko knows the tie is out of options, and he prepares to deliver the final blow. As he edges closer, his crosshairs drift across the silhouette of Camrock and his Sparrow. Henry presses down on the trigger, unleashing the wrath of his 450 caliber machine guns. A torrent of tracers fly over Camrock's head and into the mountain in front of him. Camrock makes small evasive actions but stays on course. But Henry hasn't given up. He keeps the trigger held as he barrels closer and closer to his slow-flying target. At the last moment, just above the treetops, Camrock yanks back on the stick. The P-51 has nowhere to go. He zips underneath the TIE fighter, but straight ahead of him is the mountainside. In the heat of battle, he's not noticed that he's put himself into a trap. Too low to turn left or right, Henry instinctively pulls up to avoid the mountain, but he's pulling up with a TIE fighter behind him now. Inside the Sparrow, Camrock sees the P-51 pull up and fill his sights. Without hesitation, he presses on the trigger, and the two machine guns open up. The bullets strike the P-51, and through the telescopic sight, Camrock can clearly see the look of surprise on the pilot's face. Henry and his Mustang swerve off and spin in a large circle before dropping down and falling to the forest floor. As the aviation fuel of Henry's plane lights, a bright fireball bursts into the sky. Camrock lifts his hand to cover his eyes, then opens them, only to see a column of black smoke rising skywards to the mountain. Unable to comprehend the sadness and loss of life of a fellow pilot, whatever side they might belong to, Camrock closes his eyes and prays, "Please go to a better place, and don't think of revenge if we meet in the next life." He takes a deep breath and assesses himself. Oil's leaking from his Sparrow. It's now flowing faster, and he's losing blood from the wound in his leg. He immediately turns towards the airfield. However, to his dismay, he sees Chelermgiat's plane engulfed in flames in the middle of the runway, with a P-38 circling. Sadness hits Camrock, but with 10 minutes of fuel left, he needs a plan. Racking his brain, he remembers a small airstrip at a sugar plant. It's soon in sight, and nursing his injured Sparrow, he manages to set down on the runway and come to a stop. Workers from the sugar plant help him out of the battered Sparrow and take him to hospital. At the hospital, all 5 pilots and friends are reunited. After fighting his injuries for 2 days, Wad lost his battle for life. The men are told. A heavy silence settles upon the 4 remaining friends. They're in disbelief. Chiladit stares through an open window at the black mountains in the distance. A cold wind blows down and into the hospital room, chilling the air. He and the remaining pilots sit in silence as no words are needed to be said, as they're sure they see a shadow move from bed to bed, and they know their friend has come to say goodbye. The search party descends down the mountain. The discovery of the fuel pump means that for the first time since that fateful day, Henry Minko's final resting place has been located. After years of research, Major Daniel and Air Chief Marshal Sackpennett and Hack Hackinson have found the needle in the haystack. Thanks to the effort of those men and many others, the DPAA announced in January 2024 they are going to excavate the site in the hope of finding and repatriating Minko's remains. We'd like to thank Major Daniel Jackson for approaching us with this story and providing all the material needed to tell it. Any errors are entirely our own. It's April the 12th, 1945. At 2:30 p.m., 9 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers and their escort of A6M0 fighters soar over the East China Sea. In the lead bomber, Lieutenant Saburo Dohi puts on his oxygen mask and lies back on his makeshift cot. Breathing deeply, his mind is focused on one thing, the new secret weapon held in the bowels of the Betty. A weapon the Japanese hope will change the course of the war. Radio operator Lieutenant Zenji Sugano taps Saburo on the shoulder. His face is solemn.
We've made it.
American ships have been spotted below. A pair of destroyers and smaller vessels. The attack is on. Flak opens up on the Betty, and the crew scramble to their positions. Everyone knows if they haven't been spotted on radar already, their position will surely be reported now. It's only a matter of minutes until superior Allied air power arrives. Saburo approaches the trapdoor in the bomber. The trapdoor has come to be known by the pilots as the Devil's Gate, but Saburo is undeterred.
Petty Officer Sugano, thank you for everything.
For a moment, there's a calm exchange of understanding and mutual respect between the two men. Sugano salutes Saburo, and Saburo smiles at his comrade. It's time. Taking a deep breath, Saburo passes through the Devil's Gate and down a small ladder, and he descends into his fate. The weapon that Saburo will pilot is suspended high over the sea, in the bomber's modified bomb bay. He feels the tug of the wind buffeting him as he eases himself down into the familiar surroundings of the cramped cockpit and controls. He takes a deep breath and tries to get his bearings. Through the narrow gap of the Betty's partially open bomb bay doors, he can see a slither of the unfolding battle below. 3 Zero kamikaze bombers head straight for the US destroyer, the Manart al-Abeli. The crew fights desperately as gunfire rains through the sky, turning every weapon they have to the incoming Japanese planes as 3 Zeros soar towards the ship. 1 Zero is destroyed, and another is driven off. But the third barrels on. Encouraged by their success, the Manat al-Abeli's crew manages to score hit after hit on the remaining plane, but the determined Zero can't be taken out. It slams into the destroyer's starboard side. The bomb it's carrying penetrates the deck and detonates. Above the chaos, Saburo has made his final preparations and taps out a Morse code message that he's ready to launch. His heart pounding, Saburo waits for his contraption to be dropped from the Betty and for the hurtling dive to begin. But a minute passes and nothing happens. Cold fear begins to pool in Saburo's stomach. He's suspended helplessly over enemy fire. If the Betty covers much more distance, he'll lose track of his target. Back on board the bomber, the aircraft commander shouts to radio operator Lieutenant Zenji Sugano. The explosive release bolt has misfired, and Sugano must manually jettison the rocket bomb. Sugano closes his eyes, unable to bring himself to watch as he releases the weapon. With no warning, Saburo plunges downward through the sky. Despite it feeling like the floor has dropped from underneath him, Saburo desperately follows his training. He activates a dial on the dashboard and shifts his thumb over to a button on the joystick and presses down. He has just activated a top secret piece of new technology capable of granting him incredible speed. An overpowering force stronger than anything he's felt before takes hold, and he's thrown into the back of his seat. A deafening, unnatural roar drowns out everything. The battle cry of the Thunder Gods has been sounded. Just 8 months before the mission of April the 12th, 1945, on a hot, humid evening, a group of inexperienced naval cadets fresh out of flight school are assembled at Takao Airfield, Taiwan. The cadets sit on tatami mats awaiting their commander, barely able to contain their excitement. All they know is that they've been summoned for a top-secret undertaking, and if they display the required attributes, they will be given control of a single weapon more capable than anything before it. Amongst the group are cadets Saburo Dohi and Hideo Suzuki, friends and classmates from flight training. Group Commander Captain Yunsaku Takahashi enters the room. His face is solemn.
If you're married, if you're the only surviving male here for your family, or if you have only one parent alive, raise your hand.
Hands go up around the room as Takashi watches gravely.
You, man with your hands raised, leave the room.
The stunned silence is followed by looks of confusion and disappointment. Men exit quietly, leaving an ominous crowd of empty seats. Tagashi begins the briefing. He reveals to the cadets that despite the Japanese propaganda, the war is not going well. But this weapon could be the answer. It's capable of taking out an American aircraft carrier in one shot. The men are in disbelief. This is a game changer. But Takahashi isn't finished. There's a catch.
Operating this weapon is a one-way mission. You will die.
Saburo Dahi and Hideo Suzuki nod to each other resolutely, so they are determined to serve Japan at whatever the cost. Takashi stresses to the men the urgency of the project, but also assures them that there will be no shame in backing out, giving them 3 days to consider. Despite the stark requirements of the mission, a team of cadets sign up. They are now the 721st Naval Air Group, and they will soon become known as the Thunder Gods. Hideo and Saburo soon begin training with their fellow cadets and finally discover what the miracle weapon they will be learning to operate is. Named the Oka, meaning cherry blossom in Japanese, the title alludes to the sacrificial pilots as falling cherry blossom flowers, diving to a glorious death. The Oka is constructed around a 2,600-pound warhead. During training, the pilots train using unpowered glider versions of the Oka. Despite the brutality of the assignment, Hideo Suzuki is in high spirits. His friend Saburo wishes him luck on the airfield, and Hideo eagerly climbs aboard the Betty bomber with his comrades. Once the bomber is cruising high in the air, Hideo settles down into the Oka K-1 training glider for his first flight. It's now that a rush of adrenaline passes through him, but he fights to remain calm. He confirms that he is ready by announcing into the mouthpiece.
Maintenance preparation. All good.
Hideo also taps out in Morse code an abbreviation of his oral message. The Betty pilot is not to drop the K-1 until he has confirmed Hideo's message, and Hideo himself has issued a reply. In the cramped cabin of the glider, Hideo waits an eternity for a reply. There's only silence from the Betty's pilot. With no clue of what to do next, Hideo frantically starts to repeat his original Morse code message. But before he can finish, there's a deafening bang as the explosive charge detonates prematurely and releases the Oka from the bomber into a roller coaster dive. The aircraft plunges through the air, immediately pulling hard Gs. Hideo grapples with the joystick as the G-force increases and threatens to overwhelm him. He can feel the weight acting harder and harder on him, and his eyes slowly start to close. With a jolt, he wrestles the little plane back into even flight, and the pressure slowly subsides. Gaining confidence, he sights the airfield, circling it twice before lining up for the final approach. Now, only 3 feet over the airfield, Hideo is inches away from success. Having been warned not to force the craft down, but to let it bleed energy until he feels the skid bite, Hideo grits his teeth and follows this training, finally touching down on the ground and skidding along the sandy field. But it will not be an easy landing, as little craft tilts to one side, resting on the wingtip as it comes to a screeching halt. A grin slowly breaks across his face, knowing that the successful training flight signals his readiness for the real thing. After months of intense and nerve-wracking training, the Thunder Gods gather to celebrate the new year on December the 31st, 1944. Having been granted leave, the pilots use this time to reflect on their spiritual values and life, to prepare for the sacrifice they'll soon be required to make. Saburo and Hideo are among them. The men drink sake, eat special rations and wait for midnight, when the anticipated sound of the large bronze bell from the Buddhist temple rings ominously throughout the night. Struck by the priests 108 times to mark the suffering caused by the earthly desires of man, the pilots fall into silence as they listen to the deep tolls sounding through the night. As the dawn creeps closer, the pilots walk to a humble hill known as Tornado Mountain. The normally festive atmosphere is muted by the effects of over 7 years of war, as the pilgrims trudge exhaustedly up the mountain. The icy ocean breeze meets the bright rays of the sun as it bursts over the horizon. The men take a moment to watch the dawn from the heights of Tornado Mountain. Ajiguchi, a pilot from the Thunder Gods that day, stated,
We drank a cup of sake and shouted,
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
We all knew it would be our final first sunrise.
In April 1945, Saburo Dohi and Hideo Suzuki are becoming impatient and tense. Twice now they have waved off their fellow pilots on 2 previous Thunder Gods missions. These task forces have been annihilated by Allied forces, but Saburo and Hideo are no less eager to jump into action. Finally, the day comes when Saburo is assigned to the 3rd Thunder Gods operation, although Hideo is again left in reserve. At the airbase, Hideo and Saburo say their final goodbyes. Devastated that he's unable to join his friend in combat, Hideo congratulates Saburo on the great honor of dying for the nation and says farewell to his friend for the last time. Rubble and jagged pieces of ship spray across the water as the USS Manart al-Abeli grinds to a halt. However, its troubles are far from over. Suddenly, a lookout sights a small aircraft 1.5 miles out, skimming low over the water at terrific speed. The crew have never seen anything so fast and so small. There's no time for them to react. Saburo and his Oka hurtle towards the vessel, ripping through the sky. Takes a deep breath and slowly closes his eyes. He takes himself back to the beautiful yellow dawn atop Tornado Mountain. The 2,600-pound warhead of Saburo's Oka has collided with the side of the ship. Having activated the manual launch of Saburo's Oka, Zenji Sugano has been watching every step of Saburo's journey and see the tremendous blast.
He did it!
Saburo's Oka obliterates the vessel's midsection, buckling the keel, severing all power, lights, and communications. Aboard the ship, water pours in from all angles, and those below deck don't even have a chance to register what's hit them. The Oka has done its job. The captain of the Manart al-Abeli gives orders to abandon ship as it breaks in two. The bow and stern drift apart before slipping beneath the waves. Dozens of men are trapped inside. As the stunned survivors clustered in the churning waters, the crew of the nearby destroyer, the USS Jeffers, has sighted another Oka zipping towards them. The Jeffers' guns open up on Saburo's squadmate, but the Oka streaks on relentlessly, its pilots unfazed. An explosion rocks the ship. The decks are smashed, but the ship hasn't sunk. At just 50 yards, an anti-aircraft shell had struck the Oka. The Oka and its pilot are destroyed before they can even hit the target. Not so lucky as Saburo and his glorious death in the hull of the Manart al-Abeli. The initial strike by the kamikaze, the Oka, and the subsequent strafing of this attack kills 83 and wounds 35. The operation is later deemed the most successful use of the Oka in the war. Saburo would never know that his hit of the Manart al-Abeli would be the one and only ship accounted to be sunk by an Oka, or that he had given his life not for a US capital ship, but a small destroyer acting as a radar picket from outside the main fleet. Despite their sacrifice and commitment, Okas and their pilots would only damage 6 other US ships in their operations. Of the 74 that were used in action, most Okas were shot down still within the slow, overloaded Betty bombers, and in failed attacks. The Oka pilots would come to earn the nickname Bakas or Fools by the Americans. Yet the dignity of the Thunder God's sacrifice was not lost on those left behind from the operations, such as Hideo Suzuki, who would mourn the loss of his friend and the chance to sacrifice himself for the war effort.
I felt that I had missed out on my chance to die for the nation,
Hideo would later say. Of the 17 cadets who were assigned to the Thunder Gods alongside Hideo Suzuki, only 2 others survived the war. On March the 21st, 1948, the surviving pilots fulfill their promise to meet at Tornado Mountain, the same mountain the Thunder Gods had climbed that New Year's Day in 1945. The men share cups of hot green tea and bittersweet memories of their friends who gave everything for Japan. Thank you for staying in to the end. Let us know in the comments if you made it all the way here.